When Karen prohibited my nephew from using the community pool, I had no idea who she was. Fast forward 6 months, and I knew her bank account details and her entire history of corruption. That shift from being an unaware neighbor to becoming a forensic investigator occurred because Karen Mitchell made one crucial mistake. She picked a fight with a retired construction lawyer, someone who had spent 20 years uncovering fraud schemes and had absolutely nothing left to lose after the loss of his wife. It was 6 a.m. on a Tuesday when I stood in my doorway, wearing my bathrobe, steam rising from my coffee mug, staring at two perplexed police officers and one smug woman in tennis whites. The fresh scent of coffee mixed with Karen's overpowering vanilla perfume, which should have been my first clue that this situation was about more than just pool rules. What would you do if your whole Karen tried to use the police as a weapon against you? Share your worst whole story in the comments below. And before we jump into this, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how many of you are dealing with neighborhood tyrants right now. I'm Dave Martinez, and 8 months ago, I thought I was moving to Paradise Willowbrook Estates. $127,000 pristine homes built between 2019 and 2021, complete with a $400,000 community pool that shimmered like a jewel in the morning sun. I paid a premium for a corner lot with a pool view of $750,000, while comparable homes went for $650,000. Worth every penny, I thought, especially after watching my wife Sarah battle cancer for 3 years. Sarah passed away last October, and the house we'd shared for 22 years felt like a museum of memories. So, I packed up and moved to Willowbrook to start anew. Having retired from construction law after 2 decades of fighting contractor fraud, I figured I'd finally find some peace and quiet. Every morning, I'd sit in the kitchen with my coffee, watching the sunrise reflect off the pool's surface and listening to the rhythmic strokes of early lap swimmers. It was meditation in motion, exactly what my grief counselor had recommended. That's when I first noticed her. Karen Mitchell, 48, real estate agent, HOA vice president, and owner of the model home that anchored our little community. Always in designer athleisure, with blonde highlights and perfectly maintained hair, carrying that damn binder like she was running a Fortune 500 company rather than a suburban homeowners association. She was married to City Councilman Brad Mitchell, which meant she knew all the right people and made sure everyone knew it. The first few months were blissfully Karen-free. I kept to myself, followed every rule to the letter, and slowly started to feel human again. Then summer arrived, along with my nephew Miguel. He's 16, my brother's son from Phoenix, sharp as a tack, heading to engineering school in the fall, and the closest thing to a son I'll ever have. Sarah and I never had children, too busy with our careers and then to focus on her treatment. Miguel was spending the summer with me, working at the local hardware store and keeping his old uncle company. The trouble began one Tuesday in June. Miguel invited 2 friends from his summer job over for a pool day. Nice kids, polite, the kind who actually say thank you, Mr. Martinez, without being prompted. We were talking about maybe 90 minutes of teenage laughter and the occasional splash. That's when Karen appeared poolside with her clipboard, like some kind of whole Grim Reaper. The smell of chlorine mixed with her overpowering vanilla perfume created a nauseating cloud as she approached our little group. "Excuse me," she announced loudly enough for the entire pool area to hear. "I need to see guest passes for these young men." Guest passes. I had lived there for 8 months and had never heard of guest passes. "Their family," I explained calmly. "This is Miguel, my nephew, and these are his friends from work." Karen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Rules are rules, Martinez. HOA bylaws clearly state that excessive guest usage more than 2 guests per household per week requires pre-registration and approved guest passes." I suggested registering the boys as extended visitors. It seemed like a reasonable solution, but Karen wasn't interested in reason. "No exceptions," she declared, glancing at her clipboard as though it held the 10 Commandments. "Pool privileges are immediately suspended for Lot 47, pending a compliance review." The creaking of pool chairs echoed as other residents suddenly found their phones incredibly interesting. The musty smell of fear hung in the air. No one wanted to become Karen's next target. Miguel and his friends silently gathered their towels, confused and embarrassed. That evening, Karen posted an official notice on the community board: pool privileges suspended for Lot 47, pending compliance review. She even made an announcement at the weekly HOA meeting, highlighting my failure to follow the established protocols. Her voice dripping with enough theatrical disappointment to make it clear who the villain was supposed to be. Sitting in that basement community center surrounded by anxious neighbors and the smell of old coffee, I realized this wasn't about pool rules at all. This was about power, control, and putting the newcomer in his place. Karen had just made her first mistake. She had picked a fight with someone who had spent 20 years dealing with bullies who hid behind contracts and fine print. It was time to dust off some old skills. Karen didn't waste any time escalating. 3 days after the pool incident, I found an official letter in my mailbox, certified mail, no less. She had scheduled a compliance hearing with the whole board, giving me exactly 48 hours notice. The hearing was set for Thursday at 7 p.m. Thursday was Sarah's birthday, and I had planned to visit her grave, maybe bring some sunflowers she loved, and spend some quiet time talking to her about Miguel and how proud she'd be of the young man he was becoming. The letter cited multiple violations. I had apparently missed trash cans visible from the street. Grass taller than 3.5 inches. I measured it myself. It was 3.2. And, my personal favorite, failure to maintain community harmony through appropriate guest management. That night, I did what any good lawyer would do when facing a hostile opponent. I read the fine print. Every page of the HOA documents I had signed at closing, plus the original community charter. 20 years of construction law had taught me that the devil's always in the details, and Karen had just handed me a roadmap to her weaknesses. Buried on page 47 of the charter, I found gold. Reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. Asterisk. Karen's guest policy directly violated this foundational document she claimed to be enforcing. Even better, her official letter violated at least 3 procedural requirements: insufficient notice period, failure to specify which bylaw had been allegedly violated, and scheduling the hearing during a time that any reasonable person would consider a family emergency. Thursday evening, I walked into Karen's dining room because, apparently, we were holding official HOA business in her home. I carried a manila folder stuffed with every relevant document, all highlighted and tabbed. The smell of lavender air freshener was so overpowering that I wondered if she was trying to cover up something else, perhaps the stench of corruption. The board members looked uncomfortable. Jim Walsh, the president and a recently retired high school teacher, kept shifting in his seat. Maria Santos, our treasurer and a no-nonsense accountant, took notes with the intensity of someone documenting evidence. Karen's husband, Brad, wasn't there, probably smart enough to maintain plausible deniability. Karen kicked things off with a PowerPoint presentation. I'm not kidding, she had actual slides about maintaining community standards and preserving property values. Every third slide had a thinly veiled reference to certain residents who didn't understand our way of life. The sound of her manicured nails tapping against the mahogany table created an irritating rhythm that perfectly matched her condescending tone. When she finished her performance, I calmly stood up and began laying out my documents. Before we proceed, I said, I'd like to point out several procedural violations in tonight's hearing. First, whole business cannot be conducted at a board member's private residence without prior community notice. Second, the 48-hour notice period is a violation of our bylaws, which require a minimum of 7 days' notice for compliance hearings. Third, the alleged violations in your letter don't reference any specific bylaw language. Jim Walsh perked up. Dave, are you saying this hearing isn't valid? I'm saying that if we're going to enforce rules, we should probably follow them ourselves, I replied. I opened my folder and pulled out the highlighted pages from the charter. According to the foundational document we all agreed to, reasonable accommodation shall be provided for family gatherings and multi-generational household activities. My nephew's pool day with 2 friends falls squarely under this protection. Karen's face flushed. That language is outdated. We've since updated it. Respectfully, Karen, the original charter can only be modified through a community-wide vote. Has there been such a vote? Silence. Maria Santos looked up from her notes and shook her head. At this point, Karen made her critical mistake. Instead of addressing the procedural issues and scheduling a proper hearing, she resorted to a personal attack. Maybe Mr. Martinez is having trouble adjusting to community life after his recent loss. Perhaps. The stress of learning new rules is overwhelming for him. The room went dead quiet. Even Karen's supporters looked uneasy. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning unit in the background. I slowly gathered my documents, deliberately. Thank you all for your time, I said. I'll be reviewing our community charter more thoroughly. And we'll be in touch. The vote was for 2-2 to uphold the pool ban, with Jim Walsh and Maria Santos dissenting. But something had shifted. Karen had revealed her true colors, and the board had gotten a glimpse of what they were really dealing with. That night, I opened my laptop and began the deep research I hadn't done since my last major construction fraud case: HOA formation documents, municipal filings, and Karen's real estate transaction history. Everything was public record if you knew where to look. By 2 a.m., I had found the first thread. Karen Mitchell Realty had been the exclusive sales agent during Willowbrook's construction phase. Exclusive arrangements like that typically come with incentives. It was time to see exactly what those incentives had been. Karen's next move came quicker than I expected. Within a week, she had organized what she called a neighborhood watch patrol of 3 residents with clipboards and cameras documenting every minor violation of HOA rules throughout the community. Suddenly, people were receiving violation notices for things that had been ignored for years: basketball hoops stored in garages but visible through windows, garden gnomes exceeding the 2 decoration limit, Christmas lights still up in July, but I was getting special attention: daily drive-bys, photographs of my property from multiple angles, and printed warnings left under the windshield wipers of anyone who visited me. Miguel started joking that Karen was stalking us, but I could see it was affecting him. A 16-year-old shouldn't have to worry about getting his uncle into trouble just by existing. The harassment campaign was achieving its intended effect on the community, too. Fear was spreading like a virus. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways now suddenly found their phones fascinating when I walked by. The divide was becoming clearer. Newer residents were rallying behind Karen's standards, while the original homeowners whispered their concerns in grocery store aisles. That's when Maria Santos approached me after one of my morning walks. She's a small woman with steel in her spine, the type of accountant who could spot a discrepancy from 3 counties away. "Dave," she said quietly, glancing around as though we were planning a heist, "we need to talk. There are things about this HOA's finances that don't add up." While Karen was busy playing security guard, I was doing what construction lawyers do best: following the money. I'd installed discrete security cameras around my property, perfectly legal in Texas, by the way, and began logging Karen's patrol schedule: every drive-by, every photograph, every intimidation tactic, all time-stamped and documented. Here's a legal nugget most people don't know: HOA enforcement procedures require written warnings before penalties can be imposed. Karen's verbal harassment and immediate pool ban violated due process under state law. 1. Sentence takeaway: document everything, because HOA board members can be held liable for procedural violations. I also started quietly connecting with Jim Walsh and Maria Santos. Turns out, I wasn't the first resident to experience Karen's special brand of community leadership. Jim shared stories of families who'd moved away rather than deal with her harassment. Maria hinted at financial irregularities but needed time to compile evidence. The pool incident that changed everything happened on a Friday afternoon. Miguel and his friends had waited until the designated family hours to use the pool, everything by the book. They were quietly enjoying the water when Karen appeared with her clipboard and to patrol. "Volunteers like some kind of HOA SWAT team. Exit the pool immediately," she announced, her voice carrying across the water. "Lot 47 remains under pool privileges suspension." The boys complied without argument. Miguel had coached them well about not escalating conflicts, but Karen wasn't satisfied with compliance. She followed them to my house, her entourage in tow. Voices rising with each step. By the time they reached my driveway, half the neighborhood was watching from their windows. Karen was in full theatrical mode, gesturing wildly and talking about certain types of people who didn't understand community standards. That's when my legal training kicked in. Instead of engaging in a shouting match, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Karen," I said calmly, "the HOA has a legal responsibility to ensure equal access to community amenities for all residents in good standing. Can you point to the specific bylaw that justifies the ongoing suspension of pool privileges?" She continued ranting, but now it was all captured on camera. "This is about more than just pool rules, Martinez. It's about people who fit our community values and those who don't." 3 neighbors came out of their houses, clearly disturbed by Karen's tone and the implications of her words. Mrs. Chen from across the street shook her head in disgust. The Johnsons, a young black couple who had moved in last spring, exchanged knowing glances. "If you can't control your guests," Karen went on, oblivious to the growing crowd, "maybe this community isn't right for you." That evening, I emailed the recording to the whole board, along with a formal complaint about harassment and discriminatory enforcement. The email was professional, detailed, and thoroughly documented Karen's pattern of behavior with timestamps and witness accounts. An emergency board meeting was called for the following Tuesday. Karen's defense was predictable. She claimed she was protecting the community from external threats and preserving property values. When the vote came on formal censure, it ended in a 3-3 tie, with Karen abstaining. No action was taken, but something had changed. After the meeting, Maria Santos slipped me a manila envelope with financial documents and whispered, "Look at the construction contracts versus the actual amenity costs, then tell me what you think." That night, I spread the documents across my dining room table, feeling the familiar thrill of spotting inconsistencies that would bring everything down. The numbers told a story Karen definitely didn't want anyone to read. Karen's next move was her nuclear option. She filed a formal complaint with City Code Enforcement, alleging multiple violations at my property, including false accusations of unpermitted modifications and commercial activity. The complaint was filed on a Monday, and the inspection was scheduled for Friday. Friday was Miguel's graduation party. I had planned a small celebration for about 20 family members, aunts, uncles, cousins driving in from across Texas to celebrate Miguel heading off to engineering school. Sarah would have loved seeing our family together like this, watching Miguel beam with pride as he talked about his college plans. Karen knew about the party. The whole neighborhood did. That's exactly why she timed the inspection to coincide with our family gathering, at 2 p.m., just as Miguel was cutting his graduation cake. A city code enforcement truck pulled into my driveway, followed by Karen's car. She'd come to watch the show, expecting violations to be found in front of my entire extended family. The inspector, a seasoned man named Bob who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, stepped out with his clipboard and camera. "Sorry to interrupt your party, sir. Got a complaint about unpermitted modifications and overcrowding violations." 20 years of construction law had prepared me for this. I went inside and returned with a banker's box full of documents, the original architectural plans, every permit from the city, inspection certificates, and even the final occupancy letter. "Here are all the permits and inspection reports for this property," I told Bob, setting the box on my porch table. "Feel free to compare the actual construction to the approved plans." Miguel, bless him, had pulled out his phone and started live streaming the entire inspection on Instagram. "Guys, you're not going to believe this," he narrated to his followers. "Some lady called code enforcement on my uncle's graduation party. The inspection lasted 2 hours. Bob checked electrical outlets, measured room dimensions, examined plumbing fixtures, and even climbed into the attic to verify the HVAC installation." Throughout it all, Karen hovered nearby, occasionally suggesting places for Bob to look harder for violations. Here's another legal nugget. When someone files false code enforcement complaints, they can be held liable for the costs of unnecessary inspections. One sentence takeaway: frivolous complaints often backfire when the property is in full compliance. As Bob worked, neighbors started gathering. Mrs. Chen brought over lemonade for my family. The Johnsons offered their kids to help clean up party decorations. And even some of Karen's usual supporters looked uncomfortable with the spectacle she had created. Miguel's live stream was gaining viewers by the minute, with comments pouring in from his high school friends, college classmates, and even random people. One comment read, "This lady is crazy." Another suggested, "Sue her." The moment of truth came when Bob completed his inspection. No violations. 0. This house exceeds all code requirements, he confirmed. I'd ensured everything was in line during construction, knowing my background as a lawyer would make me a prime target for exactly this kind of harassment. Bob looked genuinely uncomfortable as he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm not sure who provided you with this information, but this property is in perfect compliance. In fact, it's one of the better-built houses I've inspected this year." That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. Instead of accepting the results, she argued with the inspector. "You need to look harder," she insisted, her voice rising. "Check the garage again. Check the pool equipment. There have to be violations." The live stream captured it all: Karen's increasingly erratic behavior, her demands for the inspector to find something, and her obvious disappointment when her scheme failed. Miguel's comments section exploded with viewers sharing their own HOA horror stories. But here's what Karen didn't know. During the inspection, my construction trained eye caught something that would change everything. The original architectural plans Bob was comparing to my house showed significant discrepancies. With the community amenities, the pool installation specs didn't match what had actually been built. The community center's dimensions were wrong. The landscaping budget appeared inflated compared to what had actually been installed. As our family celebration continued into the evening, despite Karen's best efforts to spoil it, Maria Santos approached me near the grill, where I was flipping burgers for my cousins. "Dave," she said quietly, "after seeing this inspection circus, I think you need to see the rest of the financial documents. There's a smoking gun in those construction contracts that's going to blow your mind." That night, after the last family member had left and Miguel had fallen asleep, exhausted from his big day, I sat at my kitchen table with Maria's latest batch of documents. What I found made my construction lawyer blood run cold. The HOA had been billed to $0.1 million for community amenities that had actually cost $1.4 million to build. $700,000 had disappeared into thin air, and Karen Mitchell Realty had been involved in every transaction. It was time to stop playing defense and start going on the offensive. The smoking gun was hiding in plain sight, buried in a stack of emails Maria had been quietly saving for 3 years. "I wasn't sure what I was looking at until you mentioned the construction discrepancies," Maria explained as we sat in my kitchen the next morning. Financial documents spread across the table like evidence in a murder trial. "But look at this," she said, handing me a printed email chain between Karen and the original developer, Sunset Construction. The subject line read, "Revised Community Amenity Pricing Confidential." My construction lawyer brain started connecting the dots faster than a supercomputer. The original whole budget showed a $0.1 million allocated for community amenities: pool, landscaping, community center, playground, but the actual construction invoices, the ones Maria had kept in her files, showed costs of only $1.4 million. $700,000 was gone. "Here's the best part," Maria continued, pulling out bank statements. "Look at Karen's personal account deposits during the construction phase: large, irregular deposits. Amounts that just so happened to coincide with HOA payments to the developer, Karen Mitchell Realty. Had received referral bonuses and sales incentives that were 400% above normal real estate commission rates." But the real smoking gun was an email Karen thought she'd deleted, where she explicitly discussed profit-sharing arrangements with Sunset Construction for inflated amenity budgets that would be absorbed by HOA dues over time. Here's a financial nugget that will make your blood boil. Developers often inflate community amenity costs and split the profits with insiders who control the approval process. One sentence takeaway: always demand to see the actual construction invoices, not just the budget projections, before approving HOA special assessments. This wasn't just about pool access anymore. This was about systematic financial fraud that had been draining our community dry for 3 years. Every resident had overpaid for substandard amenities. We were still overpaying through inflated HOA dues, designed to cover the missing funds. There's more, Maria said darkly. The monthly landscaping contract, the pool maintenance, even the snow removal service, they're all overpriced by 30 to 40%. And Karen receives kickbacks from every vendor. The pattern was undeniable. Karen's aggressive. Enforcement of rules wasn't about upholding standards. It was about preventing anyone from questioning the financial irregularities that were lining her pockets. Her harassment of me had escalated because my background in construction law made me the one person in the community who could expose her scheme. "Why didn't you bring this to the board sooner?" I asked. Maria sighed. Karen controls the board. Jim Walsh is honest, but he's outnumbered. The others are either too scared of her or benefiting from her connections. I needed someone with the legal expertise to understand what we were up against. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen's attempts to silence me had actually driven me to investigate the exact financial corruption she was trying to conceal. Her harassment campaign had become evidence of obstruction, and her discriminatory enforcement tactics revealed a clear pattern of targeting anyone who might challenge her authority. As a construction lawyer, I had seen this type of fraud countless times. Developers and their inside conspirators inflating costs, skimming profits, and using aggressive tactics to cover their tracks. The difference now was personal. I wasn't being paid to investigate this. It was about justice. "What's our next move?" Maria asked. I surveyed the evidence spread out across my table: emails admitting to profit sharing, bank records showing suspicious deposits, construction invoices proving inflated costs, and a 3-year pattern of financial irregularities totaling over $700,000. It all made perfect sense. "We're going to give the community exactly what Karen has been trying to prevent," I said. "Complete financial transparency. Every resident deserves to know where their money went and who profited from overcharging them. And if she tries to stop us..." I smiled, feeling more like my old lawyer self than I had since Sarah passed. "Then she'll be adding obstruction of justice to her fraud and embezzlement charges." Karen picked the wrong retired construction attorney to mess with. It was time to build a case that would hold up in criminal court. Building a criminal fraud case requires 3 things: evidence, allies, and patience. Fortunately, I'd spent 2 decades perfecting all 3. Step 1. Assemble the team. Maria Santos brought the financial access and insider knowledge. Jim Walsh provided board legitimacy and moral authority. I contributed 20 years of construction law expertise and an intimate understanding of how fraud schemes operate. Our first strategy session took place in my living room on a Tuesday evening. Security cameras ensured privacy while we spread documents across my coffee table like generals planning a campaign. The smell of Maria's homemade tamales mixed with the tension in the room. Nothing builds a sense of conspiracy quite like comfort food. "Here's what we're dealing with," I explained, pointing to the financial timeline I had put together. "This isn't random theft. It's a sophisticated, long-term embezzlement scheme with 3 revenue streams: inflated construction costs, overpriced service contracts, and developer kickbacks disguised as sales commissions." Jim Walsh shook his head in disbelief. $700,000, that's almost $6,000 per household. "Actually," Maria corrected, "it's worse. The ongoing overcharges mean we're being robbed every month through inflated dues and service contracts. Here's a legal nugget that could save you thousands. HOA board members have a fiduciary duty to protect the community's financial interests, and residents have the legal right to detailed financial records and independent audits. One sentence takeaway: if your HOA won't provide transparent financial documentation, it's probably because they're hiding something worth discovering." Our strategy was multi-pronged: a criminal referral to the district attorney's office for fraud and embezzlement, a civil action to recover stolen funds plus damages, HOA governance reform to prevent future corruption, and most importantly, community education so residents understood their rights and could protect themselves. The key: I explained, is to build an airtight case before Karen realizes what we're doing. We need to document everything, preserve all evidence, and prepare for her inevitable retaliation. Step 2. Evidence preservation. I taught Maria how to use professional case management software to organize the financial documents, every suspicious transaction, every overpriced contract, every questionable deposit, all cross-referenced and time-stamped with supporting documentation. Meanwhile, Miguel had become our social media intelligence officer. His digital native skills were invaluable for tracking Karen's online activity and monitoring community sentiment. It turned out that Karen's social media posts about maintaining standards and targeting problematic residents had created a perfect timeline of harassment that correlated exactly with my financial findings. Uncle Dave, Miguel said one evening while updating our digital evidence files, Karen's been posting about you on Facebook almost every day. She's basically documenting her own obstruction case. Step 3. Legal preparation. I retained Sarah Chen, a criminal defense attorney specializing in white-collar crimes. Needed someone who understood prosecution strategies and could help me present Evie Dints in a way prosecutors would prefer. This is actually quite strong, Sarah said after reviewing our evidence package. Financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud. Just the mail admissions alone are prosecutorial gold. Add the pattern of retaliation against whistleblowers, and you've got federal charges. The trap was simple, but effective. We filed formal public records requests for all HOA financial documents, completely legal and entirely within our rights as residents. Karen would either have to comply, providing us with official documentation of the fraud, or obstruct, which would add criminal charges to her growing legal troubles. Step 4. Community preparation. Jim Walsh used his position as president to schedule a special board meeting to discuss financial transparency and community concerns. The agenda seemed harmless, but the message was clear. We were bringing the fight into the open. I spent evenings preparing presentation materials that would make complex financial fraud understandable for residents without legal or accounting backgrounds, charts showing where their money went, comparisons between what they paid and what they received, simple explanations of their legal rights to financial information. The goal isn't to overwhelm them with technicalities, I told our team. It's to show them how they've been robbed and what we can do about it. Maria handled the financial forensics, creating a paper trail that would make prosecutors smile. Every inflated invoice, every suspicious payment, every kickback disguised as a legitimate business expense documented with professional accounting precision. Meanwhile, I focused on the legal framework. Texas has strong laws protecting HOA residents from financial abuse. But most people don't know their rights. I prepared template letters residents could use to demand financial transparency, explain their rights to independent audits, and outline the legal remedies available for fraud victims. The beauty of our strategy was that everything we did was completely legal and within our rights as residents. Karen could retaliate, but she would be fighting against residents exercising their legitimate right to oversee community finances. By the time we were ready to go public, we had enough evidence to fill a federal prosecutor's dreams and enough community support to ensure Karen couldn't silence us through intimidation. The question wasn't whether we could prove Karen was stealing, it was how much prison time she would get for it. Karen's desperation became apparent the moment our public records requests hit her desk. Within 48 hours, she had called an emergency board meeting to propose disruptive resident removal procedures, with me as the obvious target. Her false narrative was almost impressive in its audacity. According to Karen, I was a mentally unstable widower using lawyer tactics to harass honest volunteers and threaten community harmony. She even suggested that my grief over Sarah's death had made me paranoid and vindictive. The character assassination campaign spread across social media like wildfire, fake Facebook posts claiming I was planning to sue individual residents, whisper campaigns about my unstable mental state after my wife's death, fear-mongering suggestions that my harassment would lead to increased insurance costs for everyone. But Karen's real masterstroke was the subtle cultural dog whistles, comments about certain residents and fitting community values and the need to preserve our way of life. She never explicitly said Anything discriminatory too smart for that, but the implications were obvious to anyone listening. This is where my legal training paid off. Instead of responding to her personal attacks, I focused on methodical evidence gathering while documenting every statement Karen made. 20 years of construction law had taught me that bullies always escalate when their initial tactics fail, and escalation leads to mistakes. The board meeting Karen called was standing room only. Word had spread about the disruptive resident agenda, and everyone wanted to see the showdown. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with industrial coffee, creating an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen's presentation included a formal proposal to implement disruptive behavior penalties, fines up to $1,000 for residents who undermine community harmony through frivolous complaints or intimidation of volunteers. When she finished, I stood up with my manila folder. Before the board considers any penalties, I said calmly, I'd like to present some concerns about procedural violations in tonight's meeting format. I methodically outlined how Karen's proposed penalties violated due process requirements under Texas Property Code, how the emergency meeting violated bylaws requiring a 7-day notice for policy changes, and how the disruptive behavior language was unconstitutionally vague, potentially silencing any resident who questioned board decisions. More importantly, I continued, opening my folder, I have documented evidence of a 3-year pattern of harassment directed at residents who request financial transparency. The room went silent as I presented time-stamped documentation of Karen's harassment campaign, her drive-by photography sessions, her intimidation of my visitors, her attempts to weaponize code enforcement against my family gathering. Jim Walsh and Maria Santos openly supported my position, showing that the board's unity Karen had relied on was beginning to fracture. 3 other board members looked uncomfortable as they realized they were being recorded, making decisions based on personal vendettas rather than the community's best interests. That's when Karen made her critical error. Under pressure and facing exposure, she lost her composure. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she snapped. Mr. Martinez is using lawyer intimidation tactics to silence board members who are trying to protect this community from people who don't understand our standards. I kept recording, letting her dig her own grave. After the meeting, where Karen's proposals were voted down 5-2, she cornered me in the parking lot. What she didn't know was that my phone was still recording. Look, Dave, she said, her voice dripping with false concern, maybe we can work out our differences. The whole budget has some flexibility. We could cover your pool maintenance and possibly help with some landscaping costs. If you'd just drop these complaints and let the board handle things quietly. It was an attempted bribe, caught on tape in front of witnesses. That's a generous offer, Karen, I replied calmly. But I believe financial transparency benefits the entire community, not just individual residents. Her mask dropped completely. If you don't back off, you'll regret it. This community knows how to deal with troublemakers. And my husband has friends in city government who don't appreciate residents who waste municipal resources with frivolous complaints. Another threat, also on tape. The next morning, Karen filed a false police report, claiming that I had threatened her during our parking lot conversation. She timed the complaint perfectly right as I was having my morning coffee, ensuring maximum neighborhood visibility when the patrol cars arrived. But Karen had finally made the mistake I had been waiting for. She had weaponized law enforcement based on a demonstrably false complaint, and I had audio evidence proving it. When the officers arrived at my door at 6:00 a.m., I was ready with my phone, the recording of our conversation from the previous night, and 20 years of experience dealing with people who thought connections could override evidence. Officers, I said calmly, I believe you're here about a complaint from Karen Mitchell. Before we proceed, I'd like you to hear the actual conversation she's complaining about. Karen's overconfidence had just handed me the ammunition for federal charges, filing false police reports and obstruction of justice. The officers listened to my recording, their expressions shifting from skepticism to disbelief to barely contained anger. Nothing angers law enforcement more than having their resources misused for personal vendettas. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez told Karen when they confronted her, filing false reports is a criminal offense. We strongly advise you to reconsider any future complaints unless you have actual evidence of criminal activity. But Karen was beyond reason. Facing exposure for her financial crimes and the crumbling of her power base in the community, she went into full scorched earth mode. Her final desperate attempt was to file a formal complaint with the city attorney's office, accusing me of threatening community safety and using legal intimidation to undermine legitimate governance. She tried to freeze the HOA's accounts to prevent me from accessing financial records, citing ongoing legal threats as justification. When that failed, she called for emergency votes of no confidence against Jim Walsh and Maria Santos, claiming they'd been compromised by the troublemaker. Her goal was to install a compliant board before the criminal investigation could proceed. The community began to fracture along predictable lines. Newer residents, intimidated by the potential legal costs and believing authorities should be respected, rallied behind Karen's narrative about protecting stability. Original homeowners' families who had experienced her harassment firsthand, along with anyone concerned about financial transparency, supported our efforts for transparency, but the majority just wanted the conflict to end, regardless of who was right. That's when local media attention turned our neighborhood drama into a public interest story. Channel 8 News picked up Miguel's viral live stream footage and began investigating HOA power abuse in Cebu. The Bang communities. Suddenly, our Little Willowbrook drama was seen as part of a broader pattern of unchecked authority in residential governance. While Karen was busy with damage control interviews, I filed a comprehensive criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. 20 years of construction law had taught me exactly how prosecutors think, and I presented our evidence in the format they preferred: a clear timeline, financial documentation, recorded admissions, and a pattern of obstruction. The DA's white-collar crime unit assigned Detective Sarah Chen to investigate. Within 48 hours, she had issued subpoenas for all HOA financial records, developer contracts, and Karen's personal banking information going back 5 years. This is substantial, Detective Chen told me during our interview. Financial fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and now obstruction of justice. We're looking at potential federal charges. For the first time, Karen's panic was visible to the entire community. She was facing consequences beyond neighborhood politics. Her real estate license was under review. Her husband's city council position was attracting negative publicity. And criminal defense attorneys don't come cheap. Her legal profits were about to be frozen as evidence. But cornered animals are dangerous, and Karen still had one last card to play: property damage. My pool equipment mysteriously malfunctioned at $3,000 in damage to the pumps and filtration systems. Security cameras were tampered with, though not before they captured footage of late-night visitors to my property. My home office window was broken by a stray baseball that somehow traveled 200 yards from the nearest playing field. The harassment campaign expanded to my professional reputation, with organized phone calls to my former law firm claiming I was experiencing a mental breakdown and allegedly making threats against community members. Letters were sent to the state bar suggesting I was using my law license to intimidate private citizens. Karen's final power play was to call for an emergency vote to dissolve the current HOA board and replace it with a professional management company, one that, conveniently, was owned by one of her real estate associates. However, she had made a crucial mistake. The avalanche of evidence was now too overwhelming to suppress. Security footage had captured her late-night property sabotage, while phone records documented the coordinated harassment campaign. Most damaging of all, Detective Chen's investigation had uncovered additional kickback schemes tied to landscaping, pool maintenance, and snow removal contracts. The community education campaign we had launched was proving effective. 47 residents signed a petition supporting financial transparency. Local news coverage had informed homeowners about their rights to HOA financial information, and property law blogs and HOA reform websites were citing our case as a model for community action. Regional TV news also picked up the story as an example of suburban corruption, featuring interviews with HOA law specialists who explained residents' rights and remedies. Miguel's documentation of Karen's behavior had gone viral, inspiring HOA residents across the country to demand accountability. This added pressure was something Karen hadn't anticipated. Her actions were now public record, archived on social media and news websites. Any future real estate clients could simply Google her name and find detailed documentation of harassment, financial fraud, and abuse of authority. As Detective Chen's investigation expanded, federal mail fraud charges were added to the list. Karen realized her once secure suburban life was collapsing. The mandatory community meeting required by state law when criminal investigations involve HOA finances was scheduled for the following Saturday. All stakeholders would be present: residents, media, law enforcement, Karen's criminal defense attorney, and a very prepared construction lawyer with nothing left to lose and a community to protect. It was time for the final showdown. Saturday morning arrived with the charged atmosphere of a courthouse before a verdict. Willow Brook Elementary School's gymnasium was too small for the crowd this story had attracted. 89 out of 127 households showed up, along with Channel 8 News, Detective Sarah Chen, Karen's criminal defense attorney, and enough social media live streams to crash the school's Wi-Fi. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with nervous sweat and anticipation. Folding chairs were arranged neatly, facing a table where Karen sat with her lawyer. Looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past month, Maria, Jim, and I anchored the other side, our evidence boxes stacked like legal artillery. Karen's opening move was predictable. She played the victim. Her attorney had coached her well. She spoke in measured tones about being persecuted for volunteering to protect community standards and being harassed by a man who couldn't accept legitimate authority. Mr. Martinez has used his legal background to intimidate honest volunteers, she said, avoiding eye contact with the cameras. This witch hunt is costing the community thousands in legal fees and destroying the harmony we've worked so hard to build. She painted herself as a dedicated public servant, targeted by an unstable widower using legal tricks to settle personal grudges. It was a masterful performance if you ignored the mountain of evidence sitting just 3 feet away. When Karen finished, I stood up and connected my laptop to the school's projector system. 20 years of courtroom experience had taught me that visual evidence always trumps emotional appeals. Before we discuss personality conflicts, I began. Let's take a look at some numbers. The first slide displayed our community's original construction budget, $2,100,000 for amenities. The second slide showed the actual construction costs, $1,400,000. The difference of $700,000 appeared in red. This represents money our community paid for amenities we never received, I said. I explained, that's nearly $6.00 per household that vanished during the construction phase. The crowd gasped as the numbers spoke for themselves, revealing a story Karen desperately wanted to remain untold. The next slides showed the ongoing overcharges. Pool maintenance contracts inflated by 40%, landscaping services costing 3 times more than similar providers, and snow removal contracts for a Texas community that averages only 1 snow day a decade. Every month, your whole dues included overpriced charges for subpar services. I continued, over 3 years, this amounts to an additional theft of around $200,000. But the real turning point was the email evidence Maria had saved Karen's electronic confession, now projected onto the gymnasium screen in 24-point font, revised community amenity pricing, confidential and profit-sharing arrangements for inflated amenity budgets. The room fell silent as residents saw in Karen's own words how she had conspired to steal from the very community she claimed to protect. This isn't a personal conflict, I said. This is documented financial fraud. That was the moment Karen's composure finally cracked. Ignoring her attorney's frantic head shakes, she stood up and started defending herself. Those emails are out of context, she yelled. I negotiated the best deals I could for this community. If Dave Martinez wasn't so fixated on ruining me because I enforced pool rules against his nephew, none of this would be an issue. The crowd reacted. She had just admitted to targeting Miguel based on his ethnicity while simultaneously confirming the financial discrepancies. I've spent 3 years of my life protecting property values and maintaining standards here, Karen continued, her voice growing louder. If that means keeping certain people from undermining what we've built, then I make no apologies. The racist undertones were unmistakable. Phones popped up throughout the room, recording her meltdown. Miguel, sitting in the front row, shook his head in disgust, live streaming the incident to his thousands of followers. At that moment, Detective Chin addressed the crowd. The district attorney's office has filed criminal charges, including fraud, embezzlement, mail fraud, and conspiracy. This is now an active criminal investigation. Karen's attorney tried to stop her from responding. But the damage was done. She had publicly confessed to financial misconduct while revealing her discriminatory motives behind the harassment. The community's reaction was swift and overwhelming. One by one, residents stood to share their own experiences of Karen's harassment, financial burdens caused by inflated HOA dues. Families who had moved away to escape her targeting. The Johnsons recounted receiving violation notices for family gatherings during the holidays. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman across the street, delivered the final blow. In 60 years, I've never seen anyone work so hard to destroy the sense of community they claim to protect. When I finished the presentation, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, not for me, but for the truth finally being revealed and justice being served. As the crowd quieted, I said, I didn't move to Willowbrook to be a lawyer again. I came here to heal. But when someone tries to steal from my community and then harass families for asking questions, they've picked the wrong retired construction attorney. The mic drop moment Karen had planned, but not in this way. 6 months later, justice came full circle. Karen Mitchell pled guilty to federal fraud charges and agreed to full restitution plus penalties to avoid trial. The final tally: $847,000 in stolen funds, plus interest and legal fees. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and her husband quietly resigned from the city council when his involvement in the cover-up came to light. Construction was subjected to a federal investigation and lost all municipal contracts. 3 other communities uncovered similar kickback schemes, transforming our local issue into a statewide HOA reform movement. However, the true victory was what we created from the ruins of Karen's corruption. Our new HOA bylaws mandate transparent financial reporting, resident oversight committees, and independent audits. No more shady deals or hidden budget items. Any expenditure over $500 now requires board approval and full community notification. Maria Santos was elected president. Jim Walsh continues as treasurer, and I serve as compliance officer, a volunteer role that allows me to use my legal expertise to safeguard the community. The recovered funds turned Willowbrook from Karen's authoritarian stronghold into the collaborative neighborhood we had always hoped for. We used $400,000 to eliminate HOA dues for 3 years, while another $300,000 funded genuine improvements like playground upgrades, walking trails, and a community garden that now supplies vegetables to the local food bank. The remaining $147,000 went towards the creation of the Sarah Martinez Memorial Scholarship for local students pursuing engineering degrees. Miguel was the first recipient, and watching him accept the award, tearfully, reminded me why fighting for justice matters. Sarah would have been so proud to see her legacy help young people achieve their dreams. The most surprising part of this journey was the personal healing I found. Taking on Karen's corruption gave me a purpose beyond my grief, a way to channel my 20 years of legal experience into protecting people, rather than just winning cases. What were once community meetings that felt like trials, now revolve around shared projects and real collaboration. Miguel spent his last summer organizing pool parties for the neighborhood children, teaching them to swim and showing them that community spaces belong to everyone. The sound of kids laughing in that pool, the same one Karen had tried to use as a weapon, became the soundtrack of our victory. Our story spread far beyond Willowbrook. Property law journals featured our case as a model for community activism, and state legislators referenced our experience while drafting HOA reform bills. I began receiving calls from other communities facing similar corruption, and helping them felt like the best use of my retirement. The ripple effects have continued. Real estate agents now inform buyers about their HOA financial oversight rights, and municipal codes require stricter monitoring of community financial management. More importantly, residents across Texas now know they have the power when they unite around facts and the law. Karen's harassment was designed to isolate and intimidate, but it had the opposite effect. Our community emerged stronger, more connected, and more vigilant about protecting each other from future harm. The fear she had instilled was replaced by the confidence that comes from standing up to bullies and winning, Detective Chen told me. Our case became a training example for white-collar crime investigations. Most HOA fraud goes unreported because residents don't know their rights. Your documentation and presentation made prosecution straightforward. Last month, we held our first annual community pool party to honor Sarah's memory and celebrate our transformation from an authoritarian regime to a model of collaborative governance. Families from across Willowbrook gathered around the pool that sparked the entire conflict, sharing food, stories, and the satisfaction of justice served. Miguel, now thriving in his engineering program, joined us for the celebration. Uncle Dave, he said as we watched neighbors laughing and swimming together, "Aunt Sarah would be so proud of what you built here." He was right. We built something Sarah would have loved, a community based on fairness, transparency, and mutual respect, not fear and control. What's your worst HOA horror story? Share it in the comments. You might be surprised at how many others have faced similar experiences. More importantly, you may inspire someone else to stand up for their rights. Remember, you have more power than corrupt officials want you to realize. Research your rights, document everything, and never let anyone intimidate you out of transparency. Subscribe for more David vs. Goliath stories where ordinary people take on corrupt systems and win. Next week, how a retired teacher exposed a municipal tax scam using nothing but public records and sheer determination, because sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay silent when you know what's right.